Hello and welcome to a new episode of the SkullKing Sports Fantasy Football Podcast, and we are live tonight. We decided to do things a little bit different. I hope you guys enjoy it. We're doing this live simply because we wanted to. Let's be honest. It's just, we want to do something. We want to do something a little bit new, get a little bit new engagement going on. So we hope that you guys enjoy the podcast tonight. And if you don't get a chance to, don't have a chance to just sit and watch this, we will still be posting it again to as an actual post on the website and to all of our various audio podcasting destinations. So, again, my name is Ryan Skullrood. With me tonight, again, as has been the case for the last week and a half, Mr. CJ Kraus. Welcome to the show, CJ.
Yeah, it's good to be back. We talk about the upcoming week, some of the news coming into it, planning for week 10, getting closer and closer to our playoff push.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. God, we're already week 10.
Yeah.
That means there's for most leagues, if you only have a 2-week playoff, there's only 5 weeks till the playoffs. Was it week 15? So
yeah.
So 5 to 6 weeks.
A lot of weeks I play into a 3-week playoff, the 14, 15, 16.
14, 15, 16, yeah.
Yeah, you get the buys. But yeah, that's pretty much like whether you're looking to be week 14 is a pivotal week, whether you're going to be having to buy or playing it out, trying to get to the next round of the playoffs, but we're so close. These are arguably the most important weeks to figure out or to like pivot off players you can't hold on to anymore.
Yeah, so we'll kind of see again. It should be a lot of fun. Tonight we've got definitely have a few players that at least a couple players I'm passionate about. we've got one specifically, and if you watch the game tonight, you'll know why I've been passionate about him for the last few weeks. So, with that said, why don't we go ahead and hop into the headlines, go through the stories of the week, and then we'll kind of go over this week's waiver wire madness report.
Sounds good.
Today's headlines.
And today's headlines are brought to you by the Sleeper app. All right, so starting with the news that we found out this morning, we saw in yesterday's game that Christian McCaffrey did suffer a little bit of an injury in the game. As of right now, he's dealing with the shoulder injury and could miss more time. He had tests today. I had not heard much about how those tests went, but his status for this next week is very much in doubt. I have seen that he's day-to-day, but even with that, he could miss this next week.
Yeah, and coming out this early, the biggest thing is they're telling us so far in advance it doesn't sound good. So if you're a Christian McCaffrey owner, I would probably plan for a backup plan just in case. Ideally, you don't have to use it, but it's definitely something to be monitoring. We've been working with that for like a few weeks now, over a month, trying to figure that out. We finally got him back. He drops 37 points for us, and now could be gone for a while. For anyone that held on to Mike Davis, great job. Also, check your waiver wire if he is out there. He's not available to our list today, but definitely something that some people may have dropped him with how CMC played this past week and how little usage he actually got.
Yeah. So, oh man, looks like I had a couple spots where the post didn't go live. Nuts. We'll have to figure that out. All right. So, next story to go over with is David Montgomery is in the concussion protocol. One of how many players do we have in the concussion protocol this week? It's him, Jack Doyle, and was it David Johnson?
Yeah.
So we'll get to the guys that are behind them in our waiver wire section and whether or not it's actually worth a pickup. So Nick Chubb returned to practice this week. And I believe that I don't know if they've officially activated him. They've basically set him as IR ready to return. And with that, they will be probably activating him for this next week.
Yeah, it's good to see him back. I think the offense was better with him on the field rather than not. Even with Kareem Hunt, the Kareem Hunt owner is a little bit worried about it, but I would not be worried. We've seen Kareem Hunt have that ability when Chubb's on the field. I think it's a great 1-1 punch. We talked about this before. but it's good to see. But it's definitely something to monitor as well, since he hasn't been fully activated yet. But all of me pretty much thinks it's going to be an activation playing this week, whether we know the workload or not. But definitely something to keep an eye on and expect him to play.
Yeah. Next up is we talked about Jack Doyle. Laviska Shenault ruled out yesterday with the hamstring injury. Received good news on his MRI. Source says that he has a chance to play Sunday against the Packers. Now the Packers have been pretty decent against wide receivers for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, struggled a little bit this last week against who was it? Was it Richie James or Richie whoever? That put up all those points, basically in kind of garbage time type points. So,
yeah, Visco is one of my favorite players in general. Not even so much for fantasy, but just fun to watch him on the field. But hamstring injury is something always to monitor. Any kind of soft tissue injury can reoccur throughout the game if he does get to play. So even if he does play through, I think it's going to be a limited role comparative to what he's normally getting, where he's usually a gadget player, sometimes a wildcat quarterback. Uses him in every aspect of the field. I don't see him as much usage. So he's kind of a pivot right now in redraft leagues.
Okay. And last but not least, Damian Harris went down in this game. It looked like, neither CJ or I saw the play, but it looks like from what I heard and saw reported that it's a chest injury. So we'll kind of see where that goes. Obviously, Burkhead got a good share of the load when Harris went out, and so really James White is still fantasy irrelevant.
You just love saying that, don't you?
I do.
So,
I hate. And here's the thing: I hate saying it as a guy who has had him so many times, and just loved having him as one of my running backs. It sucks to see it.
I mean, just his role has not been the same since Tom Brady left, and checking down to him with having someone like Cam Newton being on the field and vulturing a lot of those plays or running it himself. A lot more design runs. But the biggest thing with Damian Harris, he was the thumper. He was the first and second down back primarily. Burkhead did a great job taking the role. Something to keep an eye on is Sony Michel. He should be returning soon from injury. By all accounts, there hasn't been too much posted about it. I know he wasn't active tonight, but that's something to keep an eye on with Damian Harris potentially being out this week, depending on how he does the rest of the week. Someone to keep an eye on is that Sony Michel.
All right, and that's pretty much it for the news. There was not a whole lot of news to go over tonight. Really, it's now we're gonna hop into our waiver wire madness section. But before we do that, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Dr. Squatch Soaps. And you hear me talk about this all the time. You guys have been hearing me spout about them for a while now, but I love their products. Homemade, all natural soaps. They've got soaps, toothpastes, shaving materials, shampoo, body wash, great products. If you've seen any of their advertisements on Facebook, they're absolutely hilarious. Look them up on Facebook, follow them. You'll get to see all their videos. Check them out on YouTube. A lot of great products that, they get you clean. You feel clean when you're done, and they don't have any nasty chemicals or detergents in them. Wonderful products. We've been able to partner with them so that you can, when you go to checkout, you can get 20% off of orders of $20 or more when you use the promo code SKS20 at checkout. So again, go to Dr. Squatch, check out their products, order $20 or more, and you'll get 20% off when you use the promo code SKS20 at checkout. I love Dr. Squatch, love talking about all their products. Make sure to check them out. So let's go ahead now, and we'll hop right into our waiver wire madness section.
Waiver Wire Madness.
All right. So the waiver wire, and the way that we do this, again, just for clarification, so that as we go over this every week, the way that we set this up is we do this through Fantasy Pros. Fantasy Pros is the website that we use as our ranking website. We submit our rankings to Fantasy Pros every week. We are given not necessarily a grade, but it's an accuracy score on our rankings. And so because we do all of our rankings to that, we also have the opportunity to do waiver wire rankings. However, they're the ones that set up the waiver wire rankings. So what they do is they take a players chosen based on a consensus ownership below 50% between ESPN and Yahoo leagues together. And so, which is kind of funny because I look and Jimmy Graham is the number one and he's 52.6% rostered. So I'm wondering if when they set this, they probably set this up like late last night, and then people have been able to pick him up, and various leagues have been able to pick him up before this list went live this morning. So we are going to start it off with the quarterbacks. And why don't you go ahead and, CJ, give me a quarterback that you like for this week as a waiver wire pickup.
My biggest one on my list is definitely Tua. I think he has a really good matchup going against the Chargers this week. He looked good, like night and day from his initial appearance when he first played. He's actually targeting his receivers very well. Looked like a rookie, definitely on some of the plays, but made some special things happen with his arm and his legs. It's always weird to see a lefty of a quarterback, like watching it and trying to analyze it. But I think he finally learned how to lean on his receivers well enough and target them properly. He was getting everyone involved probably. And again, in that matchup versus the Chargers, I'm super excited for both sides of the ball to be able to watch that one. So that's definitely my if you need a streaming quarterback, someone's probably available on the waiver wire, especially after his first week. The second week, I think he really showed what he's capable of.
Yeah, and he's going up against a Chargers team that's given up the fourth most amount of fantasy points on the season, and then on top of that, just over the rolling. Well, this last week isn't included, but going into this last week, the rolling last 4 or 5 weeks, the Chargers give up 4.8 points over average production to quarterbacks. So this is a prime matchup for him to be able to have a very, very good week. I think Tua he's probably my top one. I think it's the other interesting one that I kind of like is Drew Locke. And Drew Locke is more because of, again, it's going to be more like a almost like, I hate to say this, but like a Blake Bortles type of how he's been playing, where it's like the first 2.5 to 3 quarters, not a whole lot's going on. He really struggles, and then garbage time or when he needs to make a comeback, he's getting plays going, and so I think that going up against a Las Vegas team that again, going into this last week, another one like the Chargers giving up almost 5 points over projection to quarterbacks over the last 5 weeks on average, and really the Las Vegas team in general, with the tight ends above average, wide receivers above average, running backs above average. I think that this is just a good matchup and could be a solid game for Denver's offense this next week.
Yeah, Locke, I love and hate watching him play all the time. Living in Denver, we get a lot of coverage on Locke, and he can look so miserable and so great in the same game. What we're seeing, like if you look at his splits between his first 4 games, well, let's say 3 games, take out the injury, 13 fantasy points, 3 fantasy points, 12.96. In these last 2 games, 19.82 and 29.22. And most of that is coming in garbage time, which counts. But yeah, I definitely see this one being a shootout. So definitely, he's not afraid to throw the ball. So that could be someone, if you're looking for that upside play, definitely someone you can grab off the wire and play this week.
Yeah. I was going to say, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts? I know that he's on the COVID list, but what are your thoughts for Baker Mayfield if he's healthy to come back and play against Houston this week?
I would be really excited to see what Baker does. First full game was really out Odell. He's kind of looked better without having to force the ball to the quote-unquote to the superstar on the field. So it's someone I would like to see him how he performs. Maybe he'll get back to a little more comfortable, but the COVID list kind of throws it all a whack kind of things. I wouldn't really be, till we get more news on it, he's someone I'm avoiding, but if he does play, I think that Houston secondary is definitely something that you can exploit.
Yeah, you look at the, on the season, 9th most amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks, 3rd most to running backs, 7th most to wide receivers, and then if you just look at what they've done, again, going into this past week, over a 4 to 5 week span, averaging 3 points over projection to quarterbacks, 4.1 points over to running backs, giving up 8.3 points over projection or over average to wide receivers per week. That's a great matchup. That I think that with Baker Mayfield, especially if Nick Chubb is back, if you've got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, where it could have to force Houston to focus on the run game, I think he could spread it out to whoever he wants, and it could be a good game for him.
I totally agree.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our running backs. Get those loaded up. All right, your top running back for this week to pick up.
My top running back, if we really need someone for a spot start, would probably be J.D. McKissick. One of with Alex Smith taking over, is his favorite target on the field. We saw in this last game he had 14 total targets, and in the previous game where Alex Smith took over, he had 8 targets there. So we're seeing him kind of force feed the ball that way. It's his most comfortable outlet. So I think just out of sheer volume, that's someone you can kind of plug and play, especially in like a PPR league, someone that's usable in that offense. So that might be more pick up if I'm really running back needy or I'm kind of worried about injuries this week.
Yeah, especially considering, again, going up against Detroit this week. And Detroit really struggles against running backs. Just whether they're running the ball or catching the ball out of the backfield, they struggle. So this could be just a good game in general for the running backs to hopefully take a little pressure off of Alex Smith so he's not having to force the ball, throwing 3 interceptions a game.
Yeah, those are bad interceptions too. I mean, I still wouldn't worry too much about Terry McLaurin and all that, but we're seeing like Antonio Gibson's role being the first and second down, and really McKissick being the third down running back. So I think that's kind of unusual we see with the skill set Antonio Gibson has, but it sounds like they're trying to keep him more fresh, at least for now. So McKissick's really taking that third down role. So that's someone I'd be looking for.
Yeah, I think the really only other guy that I'm really liking for this week is, again, somewhat injury dependent, and that's Duke Johnson, and it's all based on whether or not David Johnson can come back from the concussion. Duke Johnson filled in very admirably when David Johnson went out this last week. Let me see. In half-point PPR, he finished with 13 points. 32 receiving yards and a touchdown, 41 rushing yards on 16 carries against the Jacksonville defense where they were just throwing the ball all over anyways. So going up against Cleveland is middle of the road against the run. I think they're 17th on the season. And then just kind of the rolling average going into this last week, Cleveland was running, just almost a point over average in terms of what they were doing. So
yeah, he's definitely injury dependent. See what happens with David Johnson and the concussion protocol. When David Johnson's field, he's definitely the guy. But Duke Johnson has shown when he's given the workload, he can handle the workload. So I understand all the teams that we're not giving him over the years. He's one of my favorite secondary players that have the ability to be a 3-down back, but it's never given opportunities. I think he's someone definitely targeted if you're, again, worried about injuries. Maybe you're the David Johnson owner, not sure what's going to happen. He's definitely an easy pick up, plug and play for this week. That's pretty much it. That's about all the running backs I'd be looking at.
Yeah, the running backs are kind of a wasteland. I mean, you have Tony Pollard for those who are wanting to back up Ezekiel Elliott, who could be a good option but is on bye. LaMichael Pirine, who we kind of predicted to have a decent game, didn't happen, but again, he's on bye this next week also. So, I mean, other than that, there's not much in here that I'm really looking at wanting to even think about.
I mean, if you're looking for a touchdown or bust, Jordan Howard of the world would be his stat line of 8 carries, 28 yards, and a touchdown, something like that. But that's, again, you're banking on the touchdown. Ryan Nall is someone you could be looking at for the deepest, but I wouldn't even consider it. That's, again, injury dependent of the Chicago backfield, because he did catch a receiving touchdown this week.
Yeah.
So he kind of got the workload once Montgomery was out, but I wouldn't put my faith in Ryan Nall.
No. All right, let's move on to the wide receivers. I'll hold on to mine. Why don't you tell me who's your top wide receiver this week to pick up?
Someone I told you to kind of grab if you had the ability to from the waiver wire last week, if you could hold on to somebody, Jalen Reagor. I just think he is an excellent talent going to the offense. In his first game, he got 6 targets there, scored 10 fantasy points. I think his role is only going to grow inside that offense as well. So I think he's definitely my top pickup for that potential down the stretch, grow into your role in that offense. He plays a different role than Fulgham even. So they can kind of complement each other on the field. So they can definitely coexist and get what they need to help Carson Wentz out.
Well, and even again, you look at what he has coming up. He's got the Giants, the Browns, and the Seahawks. I mean, those are some pretty favorable matchups coming up the next 3 weeks that really are going to play nice for him. So,
yeah.
All right. Here's mine. I've been wanting to talk about him forever.
The entire time.
Jakobi Meyers. I've been telling you guys for a couple weeks now. Jakobi Meyers, pick him up if you can. He's only 7.9% rostered across Yahoo and ESPN, which means you've had plenty of chances to get him. Listen to me. We were talking about this, before the show. In the last the last 3 weeks, he has had 30 targets. So he had 6 against San Francisco, 10 last week against Buffalo for 6 catches, 58 yards. And then this week, 14 targets and finishes with fantasy process
169.
Yeah, 12 for 169. So here's the thing. The main thing about him is he's getting a lot of this work because of the fact that you have N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman out.
Because N'Keal Harry is basically a non-existent when he's on the field. I wouldn't even put that in the factor. I think Jakobi Meyers has jumped him.
Yeah, at this point, yes. Over showing with the last few weeks, with everything that's happened, I think this solidified that jump this week. And so, yeah, I think N'Keal Harry's been droppable for a while. He had a couple of good weeks where he was getting a lot of targets, and he just never was able to make much of them. Jakobi Meyers, like I said, is a guy that I was high on when he came out of was it South Carolina?
You're the Jakobi Meyers expert. I'm not.
Or no, sorry, it was NC State. NC State. And so, him and Kelvin Harmon. I think that Jakobi Meyers going to New England, he is very much that slot type of receiver, works the middle of the field, and we saw that tonight. He was finding the open spots in the zones. Not the best matchup this next week going up against Baltimore, though Baltimore has struggled a little bit lately against, well, they've had a couple weeks where they struggled against the wide receivers. Overall rolling average, though, the last 5 weeks is they're giving up about 6 points below projection. So for Jakobi Meyers, it's not the greatest matchup this week. But moving ahead, after Baltimore, he's got Houston and then Arizona. Arizona's a middle of the road matchup. The Chargers, who again, they may have given up not being the lowest 10, I think, right now in terms of least amount of fantasy points given up to wide receivers, but over the last 5 weeks they're giving up more and more and more points to wide receivers. So I'd say of his next, let's see, Baltimore, Houston, Arizona, and the Chargers, over his next 4 weeks, he has 2 very favorable matchups. One not too bad, and Baltimore is going to be a little bit tough next week. So again, I think that he still has a good schedule, and with the target share that he's getting, I definitely like him moving forward.
I mean, that's something I want to bring it back to, is the target share he is getting. Like we can say how many targets he's gotten, but if you look at the market share of the team, he started at 3 weeks ago at a 26% share. Last week, a 43% share. This week, I think it was a 45% target share. That's an insane amount of targets being funneled his way. Typically, we're happy if a receiver gets 20%, 30% of the targets if you're an elite receiver. The fact that he's seeing 40%, it's not a sustainable rate to have it that high, but it's definitely something to monitor. If he is getting that, he's usable in any kind of PPR format, regardless of matchup, just from sheer volume of that floor being available to be used.
Well, and if you think about targets for Cam Newton over the years, for the most part, he's stuck to throwing to one guy. I mean, for a while, it was, when Kelvin Benjamin came up, it was just Kelvin Benjamin. He wasn't really throwing to anyone else. A little bit to Ted Ginn here and there. But, Benjamin was his main target. And then when Christian McCaffrey came along, he was only throwing to Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield, and then every once in a while to DJ Moore or maybe Curtis Samuel. So, I think part of it is just the fact that Newton tends to target one wide receiver, and right now it's Jakobi Meyers. So ride that train while you can.
And the biggest thing we saw coming out of the bye week too, like Demir Bird was the getting most of the targets, like 10 plus those first few weeks. Out of the bye week and with the injuries they had, they've seen that shift right to Jakobi Meyers. So it was definitely a safe play a lot of times, especially if you're a contender, someone to pick up, and if you need that flex spot through the last few bye weeks, someone to use.
Yeah, a couple other guys. I've been big on Nelson Aguilar lately. I think he's good for a possible 10 points. If you don't want to pick him up for your rosters, I think that he is definitely a good DFS play to watch for. Now, I understand 2 weeks ago or last week, week 8 against Cleveland, 2 targets, no receptions. And he hasn't been a high target guy other than week 9 against Tampa Bay. But he already has 5 touchdowns on the season. I think that he has enough. He's getting loose enough, and against a leaky Denver defense, I could see him, 4 or 5 targets, 3 receptions, another 60 yards, and possibly another touchdown against this Denver defense.
I mean, he definitely has a connection with Derek Carr, so he's someone to monitor. I have him pretty high this week based on the matchup, and going to another good matchup, he's definitely a playable piece and has any high upside to hit the touchdown. A couple guys I want to bring up as well are Michael Pittman Jr. and Curtis Samuel as potential plays going forward. I believe back-to-back weeks, Michael Pittman has led the team in yardage. Another ascending rookie to kind of look at. We see a lot of the rookies break out in the second half of the season, and we're kind of seeing that with a lot of the players coming forward with the Jalen Reagors, Michael Pittman. I think they're going to start ascending. We saw with Jerry Jeudy this past week getting his market share up. And Curtis Samuel, he's pretty much playing that hybrid role perfectly that we all wanted to do, because I'm a Curtis Samuel truther through and through. And I'm so happy to see it, even though it's the expense of DJ Moore. So he's kind of like the thorn in the side on if Mike Davis gets the role of, let's say, CMC's out, but he also just is that deep play receiver, and he's doing the job well. So Matt Rule's using him very well. So those are 2 guys at that flex option, maybe wide receiver 3s to kind of pick up and monitor going forward.
And somewhat favorable matchups going forward: Tampa Bay, Detroit, Minnesota before the bye week in week 13. So good matchups for him. Honestly, this Curtis Samuel playing well kind of lets me take victory laps on being a not DJ Moore truther. I was one of those guys that I didn't think that he was going to be a consistent top 15 wide receiver, which was where he was getting drafted. And for me, it was because of how much he did last year. His stats, while he had a ton of yards, a ton of catches, he didn't have a whole lot of yards after catch. They were throwing more deep balls. The Carolina offense ran the 6th most amount of plays last year, and had the 3rd most amount of passing plays. And so because of that, in order for DJ Moore to do better than he did last year, he would have needed to become more efficient because of how the offense, I figured, was going to back off a little bit in terms of how fast they were going to play. He was going to need, in order to be better, or that good again, he was going to need to increase efficiency, especially with adding Robbie Anderson. And so I think that Curtis Samuel is definitely, I'm big on him. And another one that, if you can pick him up, I mean, no one else is going to pick him up, but I don't think. He's probably going to be widely available. Tim Patrick. Now, I know I keep throwing that name out there, but you look at his target share. 5, 4, 7, 8, 4. Had week 8, he was injured, and then comes back 9 more targets. Now, he's not getting a whole lot of catches. His catch rate is looking like it's right around 50 to 60%. But he does have a couple games over 100 yards, has 3 touchdowns on the season, is getting targeted frequently by Drew Locke. So, again, somewhat favorable matchups coming up the next 3 weeks with Las Vegas, Miami, and New Orleans.
No, I really like Tim Patrick as a player. Definitely one of those. He's definitely become second fiddle on the team, though.
Correct.
Yeah. So if Jerry Judy's available, which he's not on our list just because he's too widely owned, he's definitely the pickup, getting 10 and 14 targets the past 2 weeks. Again, not efficient targets because he's at 4 and 7 receptions on those because Drew Locke doesn't have the best accuracy, but targets are king. They're opportunities available to you. So Patrick is definitely one of those. I think he's pretty safe for that 4 to 5 reception. If he gets one of those deep bombs, he can get that done based on the amount of passing they're having, and with Noah Fant being injured and Albert O now being out, I believe in the ACL tear. So
Yeah, Albert O is out with the ACL, so
more targets going around to the receivers.
Yep. All right, let's move on to tight end.
We have to.
The only guy on our list that I can't even say I'm excited about, that I think is worth the pickup is going to be Jimmy Graham, simply because, again, it's because of the red zone target share. He's, I believe, still second in the league behind Travis Kelce in terms of red zone targets. And so, looking at that's just he's the possibility for a touchdown every week, averaging I think he's almost 2 targets per week just in the red zone.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham is that safe tight end who's getting as much enough red zone work to get it going, especially if they're going to be down David Montgomery. Usually the running back and tight end correlate to receptions. I can see more receptions going Jimmy Graham's way, even more than normal. I believe he's averaging about 6 a game at this point. So definitely say I have one more to add to the list, Austin Hooper.
Yep, that was the next one I was going to bring up.
Yeah, they're coming back off bye and off injury as well. So we haven't seen him since week 6. But going into 4, 5, and 6, he had 7 targets, 10 targets, and 6 targets. Very large market share inside that offense. Where he started off the season with a 2, 4, and 4. It's grown as the weeks went on there, and we'll see more targets going to that tight end position because that's the way Fantasy likes to run his offense. There is through the tight end a lot of the time, and I just can see him getting double-digit targets right when he's back as long as he's fully healthy. So we look at practice reports with that, but definitely someone to pick up for that volume tight end.
Well, volume tight end, you look at his schedule coming up the next, for the rest of the season, end of the season. Week 10, Houston, which middle of the road. Philadelphia is a green light. Week 12, Jacksonville, a green light. Week 13 against Tennessee, a green light. Baltimore, middle of the road against tight ends. He has the Giants in week 15 and then the Jets in championship week. That's a pretty favorable schedule moving forward for a streaming tight end.
No, 100% with that one. One more name that you could say if you're really, really desperate is Trey Burton on Thursday night because they have the Jack Doyle concussion.
Yeah.
So the workload is going to be going up. And they kind of use him as a goal line back as well. Because he's got more goal line rushes than I believe Jonathan Taylor does so far on this season. So
I can't help but laugh at that.
He's a desperation touchdown bust play. It is a Thursday night game, but with that concussion protocol, it's I would say 90% that Doyle is not going to be playing because how long it takes to get out of protocol. And that usually we won't know most of these guys until Sunday. So that's someone if you're don't have any of these available to you because we're seeing a 52 and a 39% owner percentage, so they might be owned in your leagues. That's someone else I want to bring up to kind of be able to grab and play this week, and especially if you need to know early because of that Thursday night game.
So you're no longer the president of the Logan Thomas fan club?
I'm only the president. It's a caveat. It has to be with Kyle Allen throwing the ball because that's the only time he performs. With Alex Smith, I am now the president of J.D. McKissick fan club.
All right, moving over. Sweet. All right. Any more thoughts on players for whether it's waiver wire or just things to look at for this week before we do our show later this week where we cover our sleepers and busts?
I'll be doing a lot of my research tonight to kind of go over the biggest thing. Leave the matchups so I can see. Look, I'm gonna do this live and see what I got.
Sweet, we can do that. Yeah, I'm gonna be working on. My projection model starting tomorrow morning, and hopefully trying to edit that out since this last week was the first week I actually had a Excel spreadsheet to help with projections and plus or minuses based on matchups. First time I've ever actually used that, and let's just say I had mixed feelings about how it went. I felt really good about a lot of things. I felt crappy about a couple, and then we had some injuries that that always tend to screw you each week. So it'll be interesting to see how the rankings turn up this week. So most of the projections for week 10 that I use kind of as a collaborative thing come out tomorrow, so I'll be able to start plugging those in tomorrow to figure out where I'm going to be adjusting things.
Yeah. Well, looking at the schedule, some of the matchups I'm pretty excited for. If Baker Mayfield's play, I'd like to see how he does versus the Houston Texans, who've been easily decimated with that one. Some of the deeper plays, I can see Slayton doing very well versus the Eagles. It's really easy to get behind the defense over there. And I would say they're looking at a big one for fantasy points on both sides of the ball would be the Seahawks versus the Rams. Because this could also be a trap game, I think, for DK Metcalf, potentially. Just because not as good of a game as we want it to be because of Ramsey, presumably shadowing him. I guess he's being a Lockett game.
Could this be a Lockett game, or could this be another David Moore game?
It could be a David Moore game as well. Because that 55-yard bomb, and we just blew that one up.
Yeah, that was one of those things that, for those of you who didn't hear our last podcast, we were talking about the fact that last week in our Sleepers and Busts, that David Moore was one of those guys that we moved up in our rankings to about the mid-30s because of how good the Buffalo Bills defense had been against wide receivers. We could see DK and Tyler Lockett getting shut down a little bit, which they did for the most part, and then DK's touchdown kind of blew that out of the water. But David Moore, again, had 3 or 4 catches before that 55-yard bomb. But that he is capable of putting those in there.
Yeah, he's one to watch if any of the corners of the game. They're definitely the defense really tries to stop Lockett and Metcalf. So he's one of those that can be a little sneaky play depending on the matchup. So Lockett or DK back can go off any week, but I think he's gonna have a tough time with Ramsey on him. So.
All right. Well, that is it for tonight's show. We want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to the SkullKing Sports Fantasy Football Podcast. We will be back later this week. I think the live stream went well.
Yeah.
We will try to. I think we're gonna try to maybe continue to do this on a regular basis, doing this as a live stream, as well as posting it to all of the audio formats and everything. So again, for CJ, my name is Ryan Scullard. This has been the SkullKing Sports Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll talk to you guys later.